Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am staff writer Cody Goodwin, joined again by Alex Scarborough and Mike Rodak. Whole gang together here once again. We got another preseason show for you guys. We're going to buy or sell SEC win totals, at least projected win totals as they stand now here in late July. We still got another month before we get to week 1 of the 2024 season, but we have another excuse to talk about the rest of the conference and where these teams are at and how we feel now that we're a week removed from SEC media days and we're inching that much closer to fall camp. Football's almost here, so why not discuss it a little bit more? Before we get there, though, a couple of topical items that I wanted to get through first. And we're recording this on a Thursday. Jalen Milroe made a small media tour this morning. He appeared on CBS Mornings, ESPN's Get Up, and ESPN's First Take, talked about the Alabama program, lessons he learned from Nick Saban, transition to head coach Kalen DeBoer, NIL, the new EA College Football 25 video game, a lot more. He didn't really say anything, I think, new, at least so far as we know. But as we were discussing his media appearances yesterday in our group chat, Mike, you brought up an interesting question to the group chat that I'll pose here for the podcast. And Mike, I'll let you begin. Is Jalen Milroe maybe being a little overexposed, or how do we feel about his growing profile?
Well, I think it's good for him to have that exposure. It's good for him to have those reps on TV. It's probably good for Alabama to have their program be talked about on national shows. I just wonder, is he there yet? It's like to go on CBS this morning, whatever it's called, CBS Mornings. I think of like Heisman Trophy winners. I think of the day after the national championship game. I think of Stetson Bennett. I think going on one of those shows when he was still in the throes of inebriation. To me, like that's reserved for like a very national somebody who's going to resonate with some random person in Nebraska or somebody in Oregon or somebody in Boston. Like those are national shows where you really have to be a big name, I think, to resonate, in being interviewed. So it was a little bit surprising that they booked Jalen Milroe just because, he had a very good season last year. He finished 6th in the Heisman Trophy. He's the third team preseason all SEC quarterback. Like there's still probably a little bit of a gap between, I think, what a traditional media guest would be on one of those shows. It was a very quick interview on CBS this morning. They kind of asked him about the general topics that maybe a national audience would care about, NIL, Nick Saban. That was really it. I mean, he kind of gave a couple longer answers. I think they used up his time pretty quickly, and the music started playing before he finished his last answer. So, that wasn't the best like showcase of him in my mind. I think Get Up and First Take, he was a little bit more relaxed. I think there was a little bit more time for him. Obviously, that's more of a sports centric audience, so I think it's a little bit more appropriate to have the Alabama quarterback there. So to me, it's just a question of, is he there yet? And as we talked about on previous shows, like I still think Jalen Milroe has a decent amount to prove this year. I don't think he's a household name nationally. I don't think there's really any college football players this year that you walk into a grocery store in Wyoming and somebody knows who they are. I mean, maybe Travis Hunter out that direction, but like there's not too many players that really have that brand power. And I think that's what Milroe's reps are trying to do. Like this was clearly arranged. They're trying to get him out there. And that's their job, as marketing and PR people. So they, I think, did a really great job in booking him for some of these shows.
I think two things can be true at once, and you kind of hit on both of them, which is he's not there yet. And in a normal year, he might not be the face of college football, but I could make the argument he is the face of college football this year. He is the most recognizable person because he does bring the Alabama brand. He is a quarterback. He is a star. And you fit all those three things in a box, 6th in the Heisman Trophy. And he's got a more charisma than I think you can really attach to some of the other quarterbacks, Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, not taking anything away from them as players. But they don't bring what Jalen brings in terms of the charisma factor. So I think that's why he shows up on those places. And they're checking a box to say, look, it's time to talk about college football. Let's do it. And maybe he'll look smart a year from now or a few months from now if he wins a Heisman Trophy. But I do think it's worth saying that, yeah, maybe in a down season, he's the face of the sport, but he does handle it well too. I think that's pretty important. We kind of have heard the same things from over and over and over again, and it gets a little tiresome. But he doesn't shrink from the big stage. He feels comfortable out there, and if you want a representative of the university and of a program, he's about as good as it gets. And I think you saw some coaches chiming in. I think Robert Gillespie kind of hit on that as well. Basically, like, you take that Alabama brand anywhere, and if you got Milroe as the face of it, you're in a pretty good spot.
Similar to you, Mike, like my first thought was like, okay, like get him some interview reps, right? But then you think about it, and it's not a perfect 1-for-1, but like who was the guy that always did the post-game interview reps for Alabama after a lot of those big wins against Tennessee, against Ole Miss, against Auburn, right? Like we all remember the Roll Tide at the end of every single CBS interview. And so there's probably a segment of CBS's audience that like knows who he is and at the very least like recognizes him, even if they're not diehard sports fans. But I don't know, at the same time, like these are maybe different interview settings. And, I think part of the Heisman campaign a little bit is the marketing side of it, the whole off the field thing. And so this could be a play by his people and maybe even Alabama pushing it a little bit to get him out in front before the season gets rolling. It's like, okay, now there's a recognizable face. He does hold himself very well. Like I agree with Alex. Like I was saying in the chat too, like if this is the first time you've ever seen or heard from Jalen Milroe, and I would argue for the CBS Mornings audience, like this is probably the very first time a lot of those people are meeting Jalen Milroe for the first time. He's a great representative, right? Very well spoken. He answers the questions. He says a lot of the same things that we have been hearing, those of us who have actually been covering him. But for a lot of people, that's the first time they've ever heard those answers. And so they're probably on the edge of their seat. They're really impressed by him, all those things. And so personally, I think it's really cool for the guy to be able to get opportunities like that. And because to Alex's point, like, he's not going to shrink in those moments. He's going to make the most of them.
If I'm putting my producer hat on, if I can make it work, I'm telling Jalen to bring Tyler Booker with him and they can be a duo because Tyler is the one who's going to get, as we've seen, is going to give you the money quote. So you get the best of both worlds. I know that's not how it works, but I want to stick up for Tyler Booker in media settings whenever I can.
Right. If you ask me who's going to be more likely to have a job on TV after they stop playing football, I think it's Tyler Booker, pretty far and away ahead of Jalen Milroe. He does bring kind of that juice that people look for on TV. I think, again, Milroe, I think, delivered pretty well today in terms of a TV setting and what they look for. But at the same time, it's a lot of canned stuff, kind of rehearsed answers about certain topics like the 4 stages of the offseason and the process and some of these things. Again, we've heard it 20 times over. It is new to their audience, but it's a little bit slightly stiff. I think Booker a little bit looser. I think he can kind of joke with the host and, provide a little bit more color and a little bit more anecdotes. And I think he has a brighter future in TV. I think of any player on this current roster that I can think of that we've talked to. And yeah, I think he's, I want to say a better face of the program, but I think we might hear from him just as much as we hear from Jalen Milroe this year, or quote him just as much as we do Jalen Milroe this year, because that's kind of where Booker is. But I will say the other thing is we've come a long way from talking about is Ty Simpson going to be the quarterback of Alabama in 2024? Because that's what we were talking about in January and February, were we not? And that Jalen Milroe hasn't played a game since then. His last game is still the Rose Bowl, and the Rose Bowl was still underwhelming. There's people on our message board during that game calling for him to be benched for Ty Simpson. I'm not saying that should have happened or was justified, but we've come a long way. I think it's just kind of the off-season rhythm, and this happens in every sport, everywhere, every team. You kind of shake off the stink of however the last season ended once you get to, close to the start of a season, and kind of that optimism, that battery recharges a little bit. And I think that's happened with Jalen Milroe. I think the longer we've gone through this offseason, the more Kalen DeBoer has talked about him, the more he's talked. The optimism is surging right now with Jalen Milroe. So I would just caution, he hasn't played a game since. He's played the spring game, didn't really do anything memorable in the spring game. And there's still questions about how he's going to perform this year in my mind. There's still questions. Nobody can sit here on July 25th and say, is Ty Simpson not going to play for this team, like in a meaningful capacity for Alabama this year? It could still happen. Like, I think there's still a decent amount of variability with that position, with this team in general, in 2024.
I think that's fair. Be interesting to see what ultimately unfolds. But I think the other thing too about Milroe getting kind of pushed out in front of the cameras like this, and even like being the guy that went to SEC Media Days, like kind of what we're all hearing from the inside. He's the dude till proven otherwise. Ty Simpson may prove otherwise, but
Ty Simpson hung around for a reason. Like, Ty Simpson's not sticking around for a third season just to be a backup and have no shot at being the starter.
He's going to be the guy. I have very little doubt about that. Things can change, but there's an expectation that the handoff is not going to be problematic from one quarterback to the other.